guys, welcome to our second EVG event at this new building. I'm Jyoti Chalara and I'm in the EVG committee. As you all know, or some of you know, our EVG or the Emerging Business Group strives to provide knowledge resource for most of the emerging businesses from all industries. Today I have Elizabeth Borelli, and you must have read her bio, but a couple of interesting facts about her. She was born in Connecticut and has been in the Bay Area for about 17 years. She is a mom of 2 teenage daughters and has written a wonderful cookbook called
Bean-alicious Living.
There you go.
For all you bean lovers in the room.
Yeah. And so I will leave it to her to talk about communication and all the wonderful aspects of it.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you for having me here and for coming. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you about communication on purpose. So what do I mean by that? Communication on purpose is aligning your communication with your intention to create the impact that you want. So the communications conundrum. How often do you intend to speak to someone with an intention, you have an intended outcome from your conversation, yet it doesn't end up going that way? You might request something from someone, ask them to do something, perhaps you're making a pitch to someone or a presentation, and at the end of the day you don't get the results you want. Has that happened to anyone? Yeah. Has it not happened to anyone? Probably not. So unfortunately, sometimes what we say and what the other person hears are two different things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And you have a little worksheet in front of you, and you could follow along if you'd like to. And I'd like you to think about, what is your biggest communications challenge? Because, I'd like you to think about that throughout the presentation, and hopefully we can address it. And this is an interactive presentation, so hopefully you'll feel inclined to participate. So according to communications guru Lisa Marshall, who's an expert, she writes the Public Speaker podcast, she has tens of thousands of followers. Good communication is clear, concise, and compelling. Pretty simple, right? I want to go through each of these just to review. So clear, that one's obvious. We know what we want to say. We formulate how we'll say it, and we think we're being clear in our request or communication with others. Concise, we want to make it short and to the point. And compelling, anyone have any ideas about what I mean by compelling? Exactly. Thank you. Why does it matter to the listener? So with these things in mind, it makes sense that if we potentially make a pitch to someone, let's say. We have a product that we're really excited about. We have a potential customer that we know could benefit from that product. We give them, we speak to them, we pitch them in a way that is clear, concise, and compelling. Are they going to buy our product? We don't know. What else do they need to be able to do in order to make that decision? They need the cash, of course, but trust. How much do they trust us? Because that's really what it's all about in any interaction. In order to be able to receive the results you want, to create the impact you want, you need to have trust, or have developed trust in your audience or your listener. I like this quote. So many times we think that we're really being clear in our communication, but the fact of the matter is, we're not. So of course, there are limiting factors in the workplace and business. None of these are new, right? There's always competition, there's diversity. We might be talking to people from a completely different generation than us. We might have completely different viewpoints. And that can create uncertainty, but the biggest issue, the biggest challenge that we need to overcome is mistrust. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. And here's a little overview of today's agenda. We're going to talk about trust. We're we're going to talk about this little formula that I came up with for how to establish that kind of trusting foundation in our interactions so we get the results we want. Bridging the reality gap, this is a big one that a lot of people don't think about, and then moving forward for when there is a situation that trust maybe isn't there, you've already have this relationship with someone that's not optimal. How do you get through that? So why does it matter? Why is it important to create these trusting relationships? Here are a few examples. All of us here know how important networking is. I work as a career transition coach, and we tell clients that 80% of jobs come from not your skill set, not applying online, not through LinkedIn, but through referrals. Trust is that big in hiring decisions, in purchase decisions, in business decisions. Customer relations. How are we communicating with our customers in ways that are going to make them feel supported? Of course, sales and employee-vendor interaction. These are all situations that require us to have trusting relationships. So these problems have been around for a long time, or not problems, challenges have been around for a long time, but there have been some new developments in the field of neuroscience that have really enabled us to understand them on a whole new level, which is really exciting. fMRI studies have really enabled us to, or enabled scientists to look at our brain while it's, live brains in functioning process, and look at the different areas of the brain to determine what's going on here, what's going on in this mistrust and trust dynamic. And I'm going to show you a quick little video, which is, I think, so interesting, and I hope you will too. Really gives you a little bit more background on what I'm talking about.
In this video, you will learn what amygdala hijacking is, why it happens, and what to do about it. Daniel Goleman, author of Emotional Intelligence, coined the term amygdala hijack to refer to an immediate and overwhelming emotional reaction disproportionate to the stimulus because it triggers a deeper emotional threat, like the threat of your life. Many of you may know that the amygdala is part of the brain that is responsible for your emotional reaction. What you may not know is that this little guy is a brain bandit. It goes and it steals the functioning of other areas of your brain. So amygdala comes up and shuts off the neocortex, the area in the front that is responsible for logical thinking, conscious thought, and sensory perception. So your logic is overridden with emotion. That's when it hijacks that front part of your brain. To understand why this happens, let's back up several thousands of years ago. It's a beautiful morning, you're just getting up, you're coming out of your cave, you're going to pick some berries, and you look over, you see a rustling in the bushes, and out peers the head of a saber-toothed tiger. There's saliva coming down from his jaws. He's thinking one thing. He's looking at you and he's thinking breakfast. And your amygdala, thankfully, has hijacked your neocortex because this is not a time for digestion or ovulation. And with your neocortex hijacked, you have two thoughts available to you. Do I eat it or does it eat me? And you ran. At least your ancestors did. Sadly, there are no descendants of those who did not run. You see, we are the descendants of the people who had the amygdalas that knew how to get away from the saber-toothed tiger. In today's world, it's like there's a stressor and boom, amygdala hijack. The stressor may be an email, a text message, your boss, a bill being late, somebody in traffic. So it's not that our life is in threat, but it triggers that old part of our brain to come up as if we were about to be eaten by a tiger. Not only that, it floods our entire system with adrenaline and cortisol. And it can pump through our body for up to 4 hours. That's right, we can have an amygdala hijack hangover. 4 hours of those hormones pumping through us. Have you ever experienced that? Where after a big emotional situation, you still feel angry or rage, confusion, overwhelm, upset, fear? That would be the amygdala hijack hangover.
Okay, so thank you to her. So what does this have to do with distrust and trust? Well, as we saw from the video, our brain functions as kind of a subconscious trust barometer. It's part of our biology. So with every interaction that we have with another person, we've placed them somewhere along the spectrum, and that's where they'll stay. So it's our job as communicators to recognize this and to work around it. So with that, when we think about how we are communicating with others, we need to be always thinking about how we are showing up in a way that is going to invite trust in other people. So we can keep those lines of communication open so they can be open and receptive, be in the front prefrontal cortex part of their brain versus the amygdala, and be open and receptive to what we have to offer. This is how we communicate, this little pie chart here. Any idea what the green pie slice refers to? Words, absolutely. So most of our communication is being read through our tone and through our body language. And again, back to communications guru Lisa Marshall, who I put a link to her website in your worksheet. There's an assessment there, a free assessment that she offers called the DISC assessment that I invite you to take, because what it does is lets you know how you're showing up. So this is so important to constantly keep in mind, because how we are presenting ourselves with our body language and our tone is how we are inviting other people to trust us and to buy into what we're saying. So of course, most of us know that the first impression makes the greatest impact, lasting impact. Any ideas of a way to make a great introduction? What's a great introduction that you can think of? A good introduction even. Anyone have any ideas? How do you introduce yourself?
A good handshake and a smile.
Perfect. This was a trick question. There are no wrong answers. As long as you're showing up with a handshake, a smile, in a warm, open way, that's the right way, because no one's really paying attention to your words. They're paying attention to your tone and your body language. And if you are present and willing, then you are making a great first impression right there. So that takes a lot of the pressure off. I know so many people spend a lot of time thinking in networking events, how am I going to introduce myself? And really, as long as you're present and friendly and inviting, those are the things we really need to focus on. So establishing trust. Trust is a chemical reaction like we just saw in the video. Mistrust generates cortisol. Trust generates other neurochemicals such as oxytocin and dopamine. And just establishing this kind of connection with others creates this biological reaction. It creates that proclivity for them to be able to trust us. And all of this happens subconsciously, but it is happening. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit today with this background in mind about this formula I've come up with for making those high impact connections, for connecting your intention with the outcome that you expect to receive. The first one is, of course, connection, which is how to get that level of trust developed with someone else. And this isn't manipulation. This is showing up honestly and openly in a way that invites others to really connect to you. Discovery. So many times when we have a pitch or an idea or a request, whatever it is that we want to interact with someone on and want their buy-in, we are really focused on presenting our ideas, on selling. And discovery means that instead of coming with our pre-formulated plan, that instead we approach it from a question level. where we really take the time to get to know what are the person we're in communication with, what are their needs, how can we meet them at their level? And then engagement. How can we get them to buy in when we know a little bit more about what they're looking for? How can we get them to buy in? How can we really get them on the same page with us so that suddenly they're engaged with the process, so they want to collaborate with us, so they want to work with us, so they want to follow through? So we're going to go into a little of those things individually, each in more detail. But I wanted to just take a step back here and just review 5 steps to a high trust introduction. Again, what we're looking for here is building that connection and building that trust. And so, of course, body language and tone, a warm handshake. Handshakes actually, touch in general, actually causes the release of oxytocin in our brains. So never miss an opportunity for a handshake, a high five, a hug. I know hugs are a Northern California thing. I'm from the East Coast. And it took me about 10 years to realize that you meet someone once, you shake their hand. You meet them a second time, you give them a hug. And that's great, right? Hugs make us smile, and it also releases that oxytocin that's so important for relationship building and trust building. Another big one is presence. How many times do we meet someone at a networking event or, any other social event, and they got their phone in their hand and they're kind of texting? And how does that make you feel? Bad. Like you're not important, like they're distracted, they don't have your full attention. And it's really important, no matter how common it's become to just always have your text, it's really important to make sure that when you are in communication with someone that you want to build trust with, that you give them your full attention. Of course, eye contact is another oxytocin builder. And sharing a smile. If you can, have just a little levity, introduce a little bit of fun and humor into your conversation, that builds oxytocin as well. So now we're going to start by talking about the CDEs in more detail. Connection, again, in the conversation space, our goal is to move people over from mistrust, positional, protective, which if they have no other information, that's where they're going to be. In a new conversation or interaction, especially when it is in a business setting, a lot of times we are there to promote our products, to sell our services. So that kind of, any of these networking situations kind of put people on alert a little bit. So we really want to take them from that space to the more open-minded, receptive, trusting place where we can form those relationships. So when we want to make these connections, we're priming for positive outcomes. So in a networking event, for example, how many of you network here on a regular basis? How many of you like networking? Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations to the people that like networking. Just want to throw out a little statistic. 50% of people would consider themselves an introvert, just in general. And an introvert is not someone that dislikes people or wants to hide in their closet and never leave their house. An introvert is just someone that is maybe more comfortable in smaller groups, maybe needs to recharge in order to get their energy back or re-energize after a group situation. I would actually consider myself an introvert. Yet, if we ask the same question before people who are going to be doing a networking event, how many people in networking events or a networking situation would consider themselves an introvert? That number rises to 85%. So most people don't like networking. So, given the fact that we still have to do it, even though many of us don't really like it, it's really a good idea to prepare when you're going out to do your networking, whether it's at a social event or a business function. It's great to prepare by doing your homework. If you have a plan in mind. You've got a product you want to pitch. You know several people that could be interested in buying your product or service or at a networking event. Take a few minutes to do your homework before you meet them. And by that I mean check them out on LinkedIn. Connect with them on LinkedIn. You know, create that warm foundation before you just go and start, you know, meeting and interacting with it. So you're not starting off in that really cold, I don't know this person, what do they want from me space. You've kind of gotten a little bit of connection going already. How many of you are familiar with mirror neurons, that term mirror neurons? Great. So mirror neurons are something that has come out of recent scientific discovery with the fMRI. And what scientists have learned is that when we are in conversation, when we're in communication with someone, we are constantly, through part of our brains, mirroring what the other person does. And so what that means is, and how we can use that to our advantage, is if they have a relaxed posture, we can assume a relaxed posture. If they've got a calm tone, we can assume a calm tone. So this doesn't mean kind of copying whatever they do. It means synchronizing with them. It's really like consciously, because our subconscious minds are doing it anyway. We're doing this subconsciously anyway. Just being aware of this so that we can synchronize ourselves more closely to them. What does this do? It opens the space for greater connection. It opens the like me, not like me part of the brain. Because the more we can communicate with someone in a way that feels familiar with them, that feels relatable to them, that no matter who this person is, they're like me. We're all people. How can you connect to the like me part of the other person in a way that is going to make them really comfortable? Because that's what it's about. It's not about trying to manipulate people. It's about putting them in the most comfortable space so they can hear your message and understand it and understand how it matters to them. So attending to environmental factors. How many of you have meetings on a regular basis? A lot of people. So in those meetings, what is your setup like? What is your environment like? Are you seated at a round table so that everyone feels like they can be included in part of the conversation? Are you in comfortable facilities where everyone feels equal and equally represented? These are really important things to think about. And then, again, positioning for collaboration, finding the ways to really relate to that person. So instead of it being about you and what you have to offer, it's about them. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So mirror neurons, years and years ago, I was looking at hiring a sales coach.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't use that term. They used, I got the technique, but they were so phony.
Yeah, well.
There's got to be a skill to that.
Right.
Do you teach that skill?
No, I don't teach that skill per se, but you're right, there is a skill. So it's not about exactly mimicking. So it's not about mimicry. So thank you for bringing up that point. It's really about just kind of in a very casual way, assuming maybe a similar posture, a similar tone, you know. Right. Well, if someone's all stressed out, say I come into a situation, say you and I are in a meeting and you arrive and you're really stressed out and I'm just completely calm, then to you it seems like I'm not really relating to your state of mind, and you're going to say, this person seems way too laid back. She must be from Santa Cruz. I don't think I can trust her. I did live in Santa Cruz, and people did say that. So But really, it's about very subtle. These are very subtle shifts, because you certainly don't want to look like you're mimicking someone or, you know, manipulating them in any way. But these are subtle shifts. And really what it is you being open to reaching people where they're at, to getting on the same page with them. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that with discovery. So what it's about is getting on the same page with someone, getting in sync with someone. How often when you meet someone, you know, maybe a friend or a partner or someone you haven't seen, and you've had a really stressful day and they're in a completely different space, can it seem hard to connect with them? And then sometimes it takes a little while. You might go for a walk or do something together, and then you get synced up and suddenly communication flows. Suddenly you feel more connected to them. Suddenly you feel like you're on the same page. That's essentially what it's about. And with mirror neurons, it's really interesting because things that we do physically actually get our systems in sync in that way. And one of them, it's a well-known psychology technique, is the walk and talk. And the reason that works is because you're both walking. You're syncing up your systems because you're both doing the same thing. And so it's just that kind of, I guess, synchronicity in communications that helps other people to feel comfortable around you. And this is all emotion-based, because buying decisions are not rational typically. They're emotional. Trust is emotional. And when you set the stage, this isn't going to guarantee that people are going to buy your product or service, but you're setting the stage for them to trust you. So if they need your product or service, they're going to go with someone they trust. All other things being equal, and usually all other things are pretty equal. So this is what this is about. So when you are, so now you've set yourself up for success by connecting with the person. You've shaken their hand, you're having a nice conversation, you're getting to know them a little bit. Now we can start doing a little bit more deeper work in terms of discovery. So back to the example where we want to promote a product or service. Instead of starting to talk to them about our product or service, we can start asking them questions so that we're really identifying their needs. So we're making it about them. And when we ask them questions, when we ask them open-ended questions, not yes or no questions, open-ended questions that are really inviting them to talk, then we don't say anything and really give them the space to talk, and we listen. And this is such a rare gift these days, to give someone your undivided attention where you are really listening to them. And it's so funny because people will often say that the best conversations they had are the ones where they did most of the talking. You hear these stories all the time about, oh, I had this great conversation with someone, and it turns out that you really didn't learn very much at all about the person or they didn't learn very much about you because they did most of the talking, and that to them is a great conversation. So it's really giving that undivided attention and letting them talk. Yes?
I just wanted to share something that helped me in
Sure.
my early career, and I kind of do this in every meeting and remind myself of this, is to be interested, not interesting. So don't
Exactly.
make it about yourself, make it about the other person. You're going to get the most out of that meeting if you do it that way. So I always keep that in mind before I walk into the meeting.
Thank you. That's absolutely right. The most interesting thing that can happen in a conversation is letting the other person talk about themselves, because to them, they're the most interesting one in the room, which makes sense. And managing expectations. So a lot of times we go in with a pitch or an idea or networking, a script that we have an outcome in mind that we'd like to achieve. But when we do that, we're kind of setting ourselves up. Expectations sometimes can be an opportunity for disappointment. So what we don't want to do is derail ourselves because the conversation didn't go exactly the way we wanted it to. We need to be flexible. And this is called, Judith Glaser, who is the author of Conversational Intelligence, the certification course I'm enrolled in, calls this conversational agility. And it's just being in that space where we can be open enough, where our prefrontal cortex is open enough, our fears and stresses are kind of calmed and under control enough that we can be open to whatever comes up. That's conversational agility. Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise right now to break things up. This is called bridging the reality gap, and I just came up with that funny little line. So how often do we think we're being clear? Again, back to the first slide, we think we're being clear in our request or communication, and the other person has no idea. This little cartoon is supposed to be that the person A asked for Alka-Seltzer, and person B brought them egg salad because they misheard. And then person B is just thinking, how rude. So I don't know if that came across in the cartoon, but it's just that classic miscommunication. So we have a little exercise on the worksheet that I'd like you to try. And it's called the double click exercise. And I was thinking you can get into groups of 4, but I don't know logistically if that's going to work for you. So would groups of 3 work for everybody? It looks like 3 might work better. So, yeah, groups of 3. And then on the second page of your worksheet, there's a couple of spots where you can write down answers. So, ignore groups of 4, it's groups of 3. And so what we're going to do is often in conversations, there are ambiguous terms like feedback. So this is a term we use a lot in the workplace, right? Feedback. But it means so many different things to so many different people, as do many of the words that we use in business all the time. So right now, I'd like you to write down just 1 or 2 word answers about feedback. What does feedback mean to you? And there's some lines on page 2 of your worksheet where you can write that. It's just right on the top there. So yeah, just take a moment and write down, what does feedback mean to you? Yeah, each person, yeah, so step 1 is each person is just going to write down 2 of their definitions of the word feedback. 2 possible definitions. Yeah, for example, another example that we could use is success. What does success mean to you? It could mean within time and under budget and in time. It could mean winning. It could mean completion. It could mean any number of things. Same thing with feedback. So let's write down 2 things that the term feedback means to us. Everybody done? No? Take your time. Okay, and so once you're done with that, sync up with your group, and I'd like one person to write down all of the different answers. Or you don't have to write them down, just record how many different answers. So there could be anywhere between 2 to 6 answers in your group. So I'd like one person, maybe the person in the middle, to just write down how many different answers you have. So everyone can say what their answers are, and let's figure out how many different terms for feedback that we have.
You're just trying to get like short.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
good.
That's exactly right. Yeah, perfect.
So we passed.
Yay, I should go around and make sure everyone doesn't have any questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I had that as kind of one too. Yeah, good thought.
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up here. You guys are having so much fun, that's great. Okay, so from each group, could the person who wrote down the number of different responses share how many different responses you had in your group? It could be from 2 to 6. Yeah, let's start over here.
Yeah, it's the understanding of what they think about the communication.
Okay, so
Hear their feedback.
okay, did you get 6 different responses, or did everyone think the same thing and there were 2 consolidated?
3 different responses.
3 different responses?
We have 10, but we're a group of 5.
Wow. Okay, so 10 different responses. So everyone in this group thought feedback meant something different. How about over here?
4 different.
Okay, 4 different responses. How about you two?
We had 6.
6.
We had 6 for a group of 4.
Wow. Okay. How about you ladies in the back? 2. Great. So you guys were in sync. Perfect. You must have connected. Anyone else?
We said 4, but it was just the 2 of us.
Right.
Yeah.
We have 8.
Okay, so what this shows is that, without getting into the definition of everyone's different definitions of feedback, that in a group of 5, there were 10 different responses. So there was only one group that actually had similar responses between the group. So what does this illustrate to you when you're using an ambiguous term like feedback or success or any of the other business terms that have so many different definitions for people, and then we wonder why we get confused or why we're not getting the results we want. So there's an exercise called double click, and this is from Judith Glaser, Conversational Intelligence. That means it derives from when you click down into the folder in your computer and get more information. So anytime there's an arbitrary, ambiguous word that could have multiple meanings, it's so important to make sure that you clarify those meanings so that you have the same meaning in your communication, so everyone's clear. So I just wanted to share that little exercise. Another thing that's really important to do in communication is to prioritize face-to-face communication. Back to that little pie chart. When words are 7% of how others are experiencing our communication, so much of that is lost in email, even over the phone. Phone is better than email, but electronic communication really loses so much of the meaning that but it's so easy to do. It's very, very tempting just to send an email. But if there's any opportunity to meet people face to face or over the phone, even video conferencing, that is absolutely the best way to communicate. So now back to D. So we've done back to E. D. Yeah, back to D. Sorry. So back to the discovery conversations. So we've established shared meaning. In conversation also, how many of you are familiar with the term recognition? Recognition is a really hot business term these days in relationship building. It's really important to recognize people for their accomplishments, for what we know about them. It's part of the connection process. How can we show up with appreciation and recognition for the other person? Because again, it's all about them and communications. And the more they feel recognized, the more they feel respected, the more they feel heard, the more likely they are to be, again, trust you, build that foundation of trust, build that connection. And then asking for ideas and feedback. How can we include them in the conversation too? So beyond just asking what their challenges are, what their needs are, how can we also connect to them through their ideas and through feedback, what they care about? And then once we've gotten that foundation established, now we're ready to engage them. Now we're ready potentially to make the ask. Now we're ready to take the process a step further. So this is, we've done our aligning. Now we really want to make the impact. And that is recognizing contributions, reinforcing success. So again, what does success mean to them? What outcomes are they looking for? How can we help? And dramatizing the message. Anytime you can bring in a story, a testimonial, an example of someone else who's used your product or service, you're doing that much more to validate and establish credibility in yourself with the listener. So those things are really important. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? Great. So another nod to the power of story. Story is really important to be able to do all of these things and to create that emotional connection. So anytime you can refer to previous situations that you've had with your product or service and customer successes, far more than statistics, examples, real life examples and testimonials are so much more powerful when it comes to establishing trust and credibility in your audience. That enables them to really put themselves in the other person's shoes, put themselves into your example and see themselves as being successful based on your product, service, or offering. So this is assuming the CDE, everything went along beautifully, you had the chance to connect, you established the foundation, you engaged the person, great. In a networking situation, a sales situation, those are wonderful tools to be able to use to align your message with meaning, have the impact you want. But unfortunately, there are a lot of situations where trust may not be established. You might be in a pre-existing situation where there's been some breach of trust somehow. You might be working with someone. Maybe you got off on the wrong foot. Maybe you've had a difficult interaction. Maybe, so these are all, this is the SCARF model, David Rock's SCARF model, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. These are all the things that can go wrong in a trusting relationship. One of those has been breached. You, potentially, someone felt treated unfairly. This is a really big way to break down trust. And it could be one of your customers. It could be one of your customers who found out that you gave someone else a discount. Now they feel, even though they loved your product and service, they thought that, you know, they were perfectly happy, but if they feel like they're being treated unfairly, suddenly they may not trust you. So when you're in that situation, what do? Well, you, I think this slide's in the wrong place, so I'm going to skip it right now. You can stop and take a moment. I mean, you realize you're in communication with somebody. They mention, hey, I noticed you gave my friend a discount on her services, and you didn't give me one. I'm really disappointed. I don't think I want to do business with you anymore. How can you address, has anybody ever been in that situation, first of all, or a similar situation where a customer, a colleague felt that you treated them unfairly, so now there's a mistrust situation? No one's ever been in a mistrust situation. This is an amazing group. Or on the other side. Or on the other side. Did you have something that you wanted to share?
Oh, just I've had.
No. Okay. So most of us have been in a situation where, whether it's through a conversation or, or some relationship that we've been in, that mistrust has occurred. And it could just be a conversation that we're having, and all of a sudden you misheard me, and now I'm, in amygdala hijack. I'm feeling like I don't trust you. I don't want to, maybe I want to walk away. So what do you do in that case? One of the most powerful things you could do is just take a pause. Just take a pause, observe, label, validate, and reframe. So say, for example, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Marilyn. I knew began with an M. Thank you. So say, for example, Marilyn and I are in conversation, and I say something that inadvertently offends her. And I can tell because I'm very present, and I can tell that she's been offended. I can tell by her body language. She shuts down, maybe turns away. So rather than just going, oh God, I offended her, I'm so embarrassed, I better leave, I can actually use this technique where I can say, Marilyn, I noticed that your body language has changed a little bit in our conversation. I just want to validate that. I think it might have been in response to something I just said to you, and I just want to validate that that's actually what's happening. And then I give her the opportunity to say what she needs to say, where maybe, she didn't feel comfortable doing that before. Maybe she just didn't want to talk about it. But when we make the invisible visible, when we call forth those feelings that rather than we can just tell they're happening, it's the elephant in the room. But when we take the time to open up and really put it into words, it makes it something we can suddenly deal with, and we can reframe the situation. We have the opportunity in any interaction when that happens, when there's miscommunication. The best thing to do is stop and just really make sure we address it in a really open way. First of all, by observing what just happened, saying aloud what just happened, validating it. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she just, suddenly wasn't feeling well, or got a disturbing text or something. Maybe it's not anything I said. So we have to validate. And then if it is something that, potentially caused her some kind of negative reaction, we can reframe it and address it. So that's just a technique for when things go wrong. Any questions?
Could I ask you to elaborate the opposite side of that? When you're the person, instead of them mistrusting you, you feel coming in the other direction from the person.
Right. Well, so the key here, thank you. So the key here is to communicate what our feelings are. So, okay, back to Marilyn. Sorry, I'm picking you. So, okay, you just said something that that really caused me to feel uncomfortable. And I don't know if you intended it that way, but I really want to talk about this. I feel a little uncomfortable with what you just said, and I'd like you to really, if you don't mind, explaining to me in a way that I can hear you. I'd like to be able to hear you without feeling defensive. So could you communicate in a way that really expresses your intention very clearly, and I will try to drop my defense so I can really understand what you're asking of me. And sometimes you might be in amygdala hijack, and you might not be able to do that, because when you are in amygdala hijack, as we learned from the video, your cortisol is flooding your brain. You can't always think clearly. That's why when something bad happens to us, sometimes it can just seem like everything's really bad and negative. That's cortisol at work. So a lot of times in that situation, the best thing to do is walk away and revisit it later. If you are in that space where you don't feel like you're going to be able to really calmly have a conversation, which does happen a lot, then you need to take a break and come back to it later. But absolutely addressing the unspoken things are really important, because otherwise they're going to, we saw that little chart, so our brain is the trust barometer. Always in the back of our mind, that is going to be there, and it's going to affect how our relationship transgresses going forward, or not transgresses, takes place, transpires, thank you, going forward. Does that make sense? Kind of? You can say if it doesn't.
No, I'm just saying, most of us, I'm not trying to make assumptions, but
No.
a lot of the time there's the trust for the person that's trying to do the presentation and gets some feedback that says, wait a minute, that's not the direction I was going with this. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, so more communication is always better. And when you can really make sure you're on the same page, and that's where the double click exercise comes in. So a lot of times miscommunication comes from assumption of shared meaning when there is none. So people might have a different understanding of things like success. Hey, I thought we wanted to make this project a success. And to me, that means in time and under budget. And to you, that means don't release that thing until it's perfect. So we both thought we were right. We both were right. We just had different meanings for the same word. And this is all about creating transparency. And creating transparency is just about being really open in our communications and doing our best to make sure that we're super clear in our expectations and our meanings, and we are walking our talk, essentially. Did you have a question?
On your previous slide, what does label mean?
Observe and label the behavior. So if you're doing something that I find offensive, like maybe you're like sitting here texting on your phone, and I'm going, I noticed you're not really paying attention to me. You seem to be distracted by your phone. You might say, I'm so sorry. I just had an emergency with my daughter, and could you excuse me for a minute? So again, that is, I might be making an assumption, but I want to confirm that my assumption is actually real by saying to you, labeling your behavior, what I see, labeling what I see you doing. I see you being really distracted. Oh no, I'm not really distracted. I just have an emergency, or whatever it is. Just making sure that we're speaking the same language by labeling the behavior. And then tips for transparency. This is just with people that you're working with colleagues, with collaborators, being really open in conversations, really encouraging everyone's participation, making sure everyone's voice is heard, even if they're not the first one to jump to the table or raise their hand. In group conversations or meetings, it's really important to make sure everyone contributes. Why? Because that's how you're going to get their buy-in. When I contribute, suddenly I'm part of the solution. I'm bought in. I matter. I add value to the project, so now it's valuable to me. So again, when you're working with people, especially if you're managing people, it's important to be really clear and accurate with job descriptions. When there's ambiguity, that causes discomfort, that causes opportunity for miscommunication and misunderstanding. Oftentimes that misunderstanding just gets buried and ends up as resentment, and it comes out in lack of follow-through, it comes out in withholding information, mistrust. It comes out in mistrustful behaviors, because that's, again, always what everything comes back to in communication. Benchmarks for success. Let's make sure we know what we're looking at and know what we're working toward. And when there are challenges, they need to be addressed immediately and openly, because they will not go away. They'll be in the back of the other person's mind. They'll come out in ways that might not even make sense to them or you. But it's really important to communicate clearly and openly and address challenges right away. And then these are some of the resources for the presentation that you can access if you want to learn more. But I will leave you with this. I just did a little Google search before I came here about trust in society. And as I suspected, trust in our society in general, trust of the media, trust of other people, trust of the system has been declining. and it's not been declining all over the world. And countries like Germany and Sweden, their trust is increasing. But here in the United States, trust is on the decline. So I invite you to use these techniques you've learned today and go out and be that example of trust and open communication. And I think it's a great way to not only be more successful in business, but in life. So thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Who's making this determination that the trust is decreasing in the U.S.?
There were a bunch of Harvard Business Review. There were a bunch of different, I just Googled it, and there were a bunch of different very credible publications that had cited all these different studies that they had done. And it was of media, of politicians, of people in general, in recent studies, 2016, 2017. And yeah, I almost put it on a slide, but it was a lot of small words and information. So, but definitely, it's right out there. Yes.
How do you gain trust if I'm in a trust business and clients don't work? Potential prospects don't want to physically see me, they want to have a phone conversation first, so it's all words.
Yeah.
And tell me about yourself, tell me what you do, how.
Right.
But you can't show them trust, right?
Right. So that frequently happens. And like I said, I'm a career transition coach as well. So this is a conversation we have a lot. How do I build trust with a potential employer? And same thing, potential customer. So any possible way you can establish connection. One is on LinkedIn. So back to connecting with them on LinkedIn. Suddenly, hopefully your picture's on LinkedIn. Hopefully you're on LinkedIn. So suddenly they've got a face with a name. And right there is a connection. And they're evaluating several suppliers or potential solutions. So, but they've got a face with your name now. So then also on LinkedIn, you can find out a little bit more about their hobbies, learn a little bit more about their business. So you can speak to them about their favorite subject, them. Even look into a little bit into their mission of their business, their values, so that you can relate to that and speak to that. These are all ways to establish commonality. So the way to establish trust is like me, not like me. I mean, all other things being equal, they don't know anything else about you. How are they going to know if they trust you? They're going to decide if they trust you by how much they can connect with you. Now, they have a name to a face, they have a friendly voice, and when you're in conversation with them, you share what you know about their business, how much in common you have with them, where you do. I'm not saying make things up, but probably in their mission and value statement, you would probably share some of those mission and values. If there's any hobbies, if you both have kids, any way that you can connect to that person is going to help them to be able to trust you and like you. Does that make sense? Kind of. Yeah, but it might be easier than you think.
Thanks a lot. It was